Now call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting for November 7th, 2022. The time is 7 p.m. Ben, would you please call the roll?
Member Orr?
Here.
Member Matheny?
Here.
Member Revolt?
Here.
Member Shroya?
Here.
Member McLeisner?
Here.
Member Wyrick?
Here.
Member Warren? 7 present.
All right, thank you, Ben. Community and Economic Development, Daryl.
Okay, very good. First item is, we are in the process of rewriting our sign ordinance, and we need to repeal the existing ordinance and replace it with 1151, with a new 1151. It's been to the commission. We need to do two things tonight. The first is we need to set a public hearing. And the clerk has recommended that we do this for 6:45 on December 12th. So if there aren't any questions or reservations, I'll make a motion that we set that hearing for the 12th at 6:45.
Second.
We need a motion first.
He
just
made the motion.
I just did.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right. All in
Second.
favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, the other item that we want to do is we want to look at, the planning commission made five suggestions for the amendments, and Patrick and I thought that the most expeditious way to do these, Ben, I think you've got the red line copy, it's on the screen in front of you. Why don't we just move through those? Let Patrick walk through them. The first being on the planning commission edits is section 1151.03, scope of requirements. They've added a final, or added one additional numeral in 1B. Patrick, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so I would like to just say as background, this is a project that I've been long trying to get off the ground. I've been working on this since I got here, and realized that didn't really have the people in force to really understand it, what changes needed to be made, not just from the standpoint of the nature of business today and the aesthetic standards or whatever that we have, but there was a Supreme Court case that kind of stood municipal sign ordinances on their head, and I didn't have the legal firepower, if you will, to get into the code and then be able to make the modifications until we switched and went to a firm. And so with that, for the last 18 months, we had the study done in relations to the Supreme Court decision on what to make changes, but then we thought, while we're doing that, let's go through top to bottom review and make any adjustments that we feel need to be looked at now. And some of it is we'll get into is in regards to the enforcement piece of it and how to do all this, and just none of this was ever really done since the original, I think the last rewrite in 2003 or so, slightly before that. So it's a comprehensive look. You should read through all of it. The only thing that you're seeing in red tonight are recommendations from the Planning Commission. So in regards to that, the first one that they wanted to add that administration is opposed to is directional or instructional signs less than 3 feet tall. What they want is they want an exemption that directional or instructional signs less than 3 feet tall don't count towards the total sign package that you're allowed on a property, particularly commercial property. They want directional or instructional signs less than 3 feet tall to be exempted. We're opposed to that because we see where you can use a directional or instructional sign to say, like, it's less than 3 feet tall. They give no restriction on length, but you could say, this is not a real life example, it's just something that's come to my head, but you could say, debold with an arrow this way, the world's greatest ATM maker. And then another sign with an arrow that says, keep going. Diebold, the world's greatest manufacturer of restaurant quick service order kiosks. And you see that being use the right word here, but the intent being converted to use for some other purpose, when the idea was just to say, trucks this way.
Mhm.
I see it, that granting this exemption creates another thing. It should just, we're not saying that you can't have a directional or instructional sign. It just needs to be within the confines of this ordinance that says this is the total package. You get so much potential on your building, so much potential as a pole sign or a monument sign, and that this can't be exempted from it. It needs to be part.
Mhm.
So, without any restrictions as to quantity, length, I think that should not be something that's just put in here. And given the nature of the business in North Canton, I'm not sure that there's really a need for, unencumbered, unrestricted amount of signs that relate to direction.
I think, Patrick, the point you make is to summarize it, is that intent, as this was being rewritten, is to kind of reduce, if you will, sign pollution.
Yes.
Mhm.
It's really what, and standardize our signage up through the community. Does anyone have any questions for Patrick on this? I don't think we need a motion or anything, we're not amending it, but is there anyone who supports this? Okay, so we'll move on then. The next set of suggestions came in section 115105, and these deal with monument signs and whether they're conditional or not permitted uses, and an amendment down in section D, Schedule D, the insertion of some language regarding maximum area. So Patrick, do you want to pick up?
All right, so at the top of your screen there, just in the red, kind of what we're looking at is where these electronic message content signs is what we're talking about. You can see down there where it said EMC's permitted. It was being permitted in the column in which those districts along the Main Street corridor were allowed. So it was permitted in Main Street North Gateway, Main Street North, Main Street South, Main Street South Gateway. The Planning Commission is asking that it be made conditional rather than permitted in those, and then strike Main Street North, Main Street Center, and only allow it conditionally in the two gateways. These are electronic message content signs. So like you see at Zion Church, Darcy Friel's place, Community Christian Church. There are a number of places that have that, and it's just a matter of, what do you think the directional flow is in the marketplace towards that versus traditional signs? What do you want? The Planning Commission is saying that they want it conditional in the two gateways and not permitted anywhere else. So I think that pretty much, and then down at the far column, the GBA, GBB, OB, so this would be stuff not on Main Street, but just the rest of the city, conditional. And that's, entirely up to the council and the mayor, what you guys want. I'm looking at it from what I see when I'm out there, on the economic development front, the kind of stuff that people want. That's the kind of stuff that people want, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have it in your community if you don't want it. So I know that over the years, it has been a source of dialogue on both sides, whether we should have it or whether we shouldn't have it. So whatever the administration doesn't have a position on that, it's changed.
Let me ask you this question. For the people who have the digital signs now, have we had any problems and or complaints regarding the use? For example, the churches get to, they can very quickly and conveniently announce special events. They can quickly and conveniently announce Sunday sermons, for example, etc. So this is an excellent way to provide really sort of very contemporary messaging. I think there at one time, there was even talk about the city having its own message board somewhere
Mhm.
for that purpose. So, and we had problems, that's my question.
No, there are still restrictions in it, even if you did permit them. As you can see, the sign face, it can only be 25% of the face of the sign is the electronic part. And then, there's other illumination requirements elsewhere. So we try to address that, we're not interested in, this monster-sized sign that is gonna blaze out.
What would be,
and be distracting.
let's say the church, there shouldn't be, I don't believe they have anything, so they could still possibly get something. Right?
Yes, under Parks and Institutions presently, that is additional, and it would be, they did not recommend a change to that.
There would be other churches on the other side of Maple, I think one has one right now.
The Baptist Church,
Yeah,
Mhm.
I think the
That one that
Baptist church.
Marquardt.
There you go. I mean, I think as long as we're still, policing the size of the signs.
Yes.
So you're not gonna have something like you see on the side of the highway at the car dealerships. I mean, I for one am okay with them,
Here is.
as long as it's a
here is-
condition.
Let's go back to Patrick's point just for a second. We are in the process of land banking properties outside of the two terminal gateways.
Mhm.
We are aggregating properties for larger projects. We may need a digital sign for that. And the question is, do you really want to make that, even though it is a small thing, a potential impediment for a project?
Agreed.
Question. I think it just depends on your comfort zone. The other thing is this, as I've often said, becomes a problem, always come back, pick up the edits.
Mhm.
We do a lot. Well, of course we do. We should.
But even like for future annexation and stuff of that nature, to areas that we might have someday,
Well,
That's a good point.
it's an excellent point.
you know?
All right, so I guess the question is, do we want to set the planning commission's recommendations aside? Is there anyone who wants to incorporate them?
I think we set them aside on this.
Okay, is that the consensus?
I agree.
Okay. Patrick, let's move on then.
Okay.
Freestanding signs, section 115107.
You
Roofs.
skip wall
Yeah.
sign.
Pardon?
You skip
Wall
wall
signs.
sign.
Oh, small signs, wall signs. Okay. You're right. D.
Okay, so, we spent a lot of time in our group going through this and trying to get, an understanding by district. Again, to try to incorporate that it's not a one size fits all. That there are different buildings in different areas and they sit back from the street or they don't sit back from the street, trying to get something that kind of works. The maximum area of any single sign, they've increased it to 500 square feet for a single sign. We had it at 200. Is that correct, Ben?
No, this restriction is entirely new to them, so we didn't
Oh.
have a maximum
We
sign.
didn't have
area.
anything.
Yeah.
They want to impose a maximum.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. So that's probably worth putting in. I think that's a good add. Just
It's a little
500 is
small, because if you take a look at the sign on. the
500 square feet.
Well, I'm thinking it can go either way. If you've got a small building, 500 square feet is,
Yeah, you know, you go 25 by 25, or, you know, being in the sign making business, you know. We've gone to those overwhelmed, but we're seeing more and more bigger signs.
I mean,
Like, John, can you give me an example of one? Like, I would just, like, off the top of your head, like, just so I can think of how big it really.
It's, employers help,
Okay.
Old Road,
Yeah,
we've seen that one.
yeah.
And now I'm we're doing that, and then they have some around.
So they want it bigger.
They want to-
Okay.
Because now you've got the Meyer store, you've got all those stores going down.
So would you say right now it's a 500 square feet?
Todd's big.
Oh, it's bigger than that even. Okay.
Well-
Even like you take a look at the library, about how big are your signs out there? If you guys do anything or want to do something, sure you want a huge sign, a big sign.
I don't know,
Do
we
you
want
want
bigger
this?
than 500
I,
square feet.
yeah, I don't
mean,
believe, 500 square feet is
yeah.
huge, but
And
yeah.
the 500 square feet limitation is on any single sign. So let's say you had a small narrow frontage like the chamber building.
mhm.
Right.
Their 5% of their facade is not going to get anywhere close to 500 square
No.
feet.
And that's a narrow.
Yeah.
narrow.
Look at the maximum total sign area, because that's more restrictive. You just don't want it to exceed the 500 square feet
Well, is it
total.
gonna be a different from being on the road to being on the building?
These are wall signs.
These are wall signs, okay. So that would be a sign.
So
Okay.
5% of the facade is the total sign area square foot limitation. So 5% of the Diebold building, or the IRG building, whatever it is, that facade that faces Main Street,
Mhm.
5% of that could exceed 500 square feet. So that's why they put in the limitation, 500 square feet for one particular sign. And then you can see when you get to like Main Street North and South, it switches to a different, 2 square feet per linear foot of facade. The buildings are kind of changing.
Okay, so we have three questions in this section. First is, the administration is comfortable with the maximum area of any single sign not to exceed 500 square feet. Are we in agreement that that's a suitable amendment?
I'm just trying to think of an example where 500 feet in the city wouldn't be big enough. I mean, it's
I
not
wonder how
like
big that sign is for the hitting academy.
that's a large sign.
Yeah.
What academy?
The DBAT.
The batting academy.
It doesn't exceed 500.
It's like, I can't imagine a sign.
I mean, I'm not scared that it's
500 square feet's a pretty good size.
enough. I'm just thinking if 500 square feet might be too much, but
25 feet, that's 2.5 stories.
Yeah.
Or 2 stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Said it was 3 times a parking lot space.
yeah.
Yeah,
Is your visual.
okay. All right, so.
Everybody go to the parking lot and look and come back.
Right.
So are we comfortable with 500 feet at this point?
It's big.
It's big.
It's big. Do you
Yeah.
want to take it down? Always take it up later.
Yeah.
Well,
They can always go for a variance. if they-
True.
Well, and it's relative to the size of the building,
That's a
right?
good
I mean,
point.
That's 5%.
yeah.
So it's 500 feet
no more-
or,
Or no more than 500
Yeah.
square feet.
Mhm.
It's pretty good size.
Yeah.
But I can live with it.
Yeah.
Let's move up. Are we comfortable with 500? So we'll move on. Okay, let's go up. One of the other recommendations was, if you look in the column, it says maximum total sign area. So it's a grammatical amendment that they proposed. Administration, are you comfortable with that?
Well,
Okay.
that was I put that in to clarify the difference between the added row and the row that was pre-existing. So that the total word goes with the 500 square feet.
Okay. Is that consistent with the minutes from the planning commission, Howard?
I believe so. yeah.
Take a look at the 5 recommendations. I believe that was that added. Maybe we've
Well,
got a
what
little
I'm
bit-
saying is I added the word total to clarify the difference
Mhm.
between that row and the row below it,
Okay,
applying
but you
to
have
just a
added
single.
it.
Yes,
Okay,
as part of the 500 amendment.
and I take it you have added single for clarification as well?
Yeah.
Notes, which are in my computer, because I don't have them. All right, I'm gonna take your word for that. But we will need to authorize the use of total and single as well. Are there any questions or comments?
Mm-mm.
So this particular section, we will amend the legislation to include those changes. Now, we're gonna get on to section 115107 freestanding signs. Patrick? Maximum sign face, ENC. ENC is permitted, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this is again, just planning commission opting to not have the freestanding EMC sign in the Main Street North Gateway and South Gateway or in the GBA, GBB, OBB to be permitted. They want it to be conditional.
So let me ask you this question. Planning Commission. I've got an individual who is going to spend a considerable sum of money on a car wash in the North Gateway, correct? What if he wants to run a special on a certain day? Or he's going to support the Hoover High School cross-country team and donate a percentage?
Mhm.
Got to have conditional use? Or are we just going to allow him to do it so he can change his business model on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think it gets back to what is the planning commission doing with the recommendation, all right? So they're gonna, does it meet all the other code requirements? That's not something that they determine or can waive, that's gonna be handled by the building and permitting and zoning department. If it complies with everything else. The planning commission is, looking to maybe be the aesthetic guardian here. It almost borders on like an architectural review board, in my opinion.
I don't think we're there yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. Not sure I want to start down that path. Thoughts, everyone?
I think we stick with the way it was with this, rather than following their recommendation.
I think if you look at what's already in the North Gateway and the South Gateway, making it conditional gives them an unfair advantage if they get denied.
You're right.
All right, any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I guess we'll let the original language prevail. So, just to recap, and I think that is it.
There's
No,
one
No,
more.
one more.
I'm sorry. Temporary signs.
This one will be the one that we talk about the most.
Yeah. Planning Commission has recommended that temporary signs shall be displayed for a duration not to exceed 45 days. It's found in section
1151:12.
What was it before?
It's new. This is a new,
Completely new?
Mhm.
totally new.
So these would be political signs, housing signs, remodeling.
There are certain signs that if you read at the beginning of the ordinance that are exempted. these kind of temporary regulations, so like an ideological sign. Vote for me. This used to be something that was in the code. We redid it, we took it out. Planning is trying to put it back in. And it comes down to really an enforcement means. Okay, so I want you to think about this. Why this just isn't ever going to work. So somebody puts out a temporary sign that's not exempted, you know, realtor sign would be exempted in our list. If somebody puts out a temporary sign that's not exempted, I don't know when it went out. How do I know what day it was put up unless, you know, I know of the day I drive by it and I see it, I know it from that day, but I don't know how long it was up before that. So let's say I give them 35 days from that time. I gotta calendar this, to go back, follow up on every single sign that's gonna be out there that would fall under this limitation. There's just no way to administer that, not without an army of people. And then what happens when they don't take it down after 45 days? Am I sending them a notice, hey, by the way, your 45th day's coming up, you gotta make sure that's down. And then if it isn't down, then I go up the next day and do what? Do they take it down? Do I take it down? Let's say I take it down. Okay, then the next day they put another one up, another sign, it's a different sign, 45 days. From that sign, I mean, it just doesn't make practical sense. And this is where, you know, I think that's all we did back in the day before I got here. They went for the low-hanging fruit, drove around, found signs, cataloged them, did whatever, and that's all we spent time doing, was popping signs out and throwing them in the trunk of the car, bringing them down to the park garage, notifying people that their signs were down here, they could come pick them up, and blah, 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 it goes on and on. Where we were missing, you know, oh, the spouting's hanging off of this place, this yard here isn't being kept up. So I just don't think that it kind of works. I don't know that there's an ideal solution, honestly. We've looked at, you know, codes in other cities, and I don't think anybody has a lock on what is the right way. Everybody has to kind of deal with it. But putting that in there when I'm not going to be able to enforce it because we don't have the people, nor would we hire the people to do this, because I don't think that we can effectively administer it in a non-discriminatory way. I don't know when that first one went up. So the first sign goes up at Charlie's that they're running a special, and I notice it, you know, turns out a week after it's gone up, and then Burger King puts one up, and I notice it the first day because I caught it from when I was up looking at Charlie's, and, you know, now I got 2 calendars running, and it doesn't make sense. What we wanted to do with the temporary sign is create a situation where it's easily recognized that it's not really in compliance. So we really spent the time on where the signs are located. So in an area where there are sidewalks, we're saying that the signs need to be on the interior of the sidewalk, in their yard, not in the devil strip. So if we're driving around, as our code enforcement coordinators will do, if this were to go into effect at some point in the future here, and they see a sign that's in the devil strip, the language in here is that we have the ability to remove that sign. It's in the
And
devil
dispose
strip.
of it.
And dispose of it if
Yeah,
we
not
want to.
hold it, just,
Just get rid of it. We
Right.
have that ability. But, you know, maybe it's I'll tell you, this is the stuff that we got into is really fascinating. Let's say you're driving down Willoway Street, southeast, and somebody puts a sign in the devil strip that they're missing their dog, lost dog, or cat. Are we going to be the people that drive around and just snatch that sign and throw it in the trunk? No, right? So we're going to say, you know, look, this sign is supposed to be here, you know. We'll put the sign there, let you know that that's the way it's supposed to be. So, you know, but as we go through that, I think everybody kind of gets a gets a freebie notice that, hey, this isn't supposed to be in the devil strip, it's supposed to be on the inside. Now, in an area where there are no sidewalks, we've placed in here that it needs to be 8 feet from the roadway. So generally, when you take in a devil strip and the width of the sidewalk curve, turns out to be about that anyway. But in some areas if we went down Wise Northeast, you've got a 12-inch, devil strip, 29-inch sidewalk, and then embankment, right? So, to just uniformly say it's 8 feet everywhere, that isn't practical. So that's why we opted for the sidewalk thing. If it's on the inside of the sidewalk, you can put it on your little hillside, that'll work, regardless of what the sign is. So
Roughly, how many signs do we have like this?
how many signs are out there?
I don't think you count them.
It's, a lot. You can go to certain intersections and they're flooded with,
They don't take them.
number of signs on the corner. You got that issue. Depending on the summer, you get all the garage sale signs. One of the other provisions in here is that no posting signs on any public or private utility poles. So we want to clean that whole thing up.
Mhm.
So
So why have it, we can't enforce it?
Right, and I think that's what it comes down to. I mean, I kind of agree with what the direction they're going, that they agree that the signs are a blight, but if we can't enforce it, why have it?
And then, I've talked with a couple of you, and I think there's a provision in here that we would, you guys may want to air that out here, but I'm just trying to find a way. So we put in there that you're limited to 1 temporary sign for every 200 linear feet that you have. Most lots don't have 200 linear feet, so we're talking about 1 sign. And that's totally up to you what you all decide on that. The idea was to engage in some type of dialogue to get you to understand the dilemma that we face in trying to enforce what we pass. And I recognize that, 1 is not one that would work. But, we don't want to, you don't want to say unlimited. So, striking a balance there. I throw that out.
Let me ask you this, Patrick. A political sign is a temporary sign, is it not?
A political sign is a temporary sign, but it's an ideological sign. It's exempted.
Mhm.
So this is, with the things that were exempted, we were trying to gear it towards more things that would be commercially out there, but taking some of those commercial ones off. So like realtor sign. It's, when the house sells, they generally pull the signs anyway, so they're not out there permanently.
Mm.
Like a garage sale sign.
But garage sales.
Don't we have rules for garage sales right now? I thought you could only have so many a year.
Again, another thing that I don't want to be in the business of pulling permits for garage sale. Devoting resources to when the garage sale is, now the garage sale's over, did you take down the sign? You go on and on and on. When you could wrap up a whole department in this.
I think is there anyone who would like to include this provision, recommendation from the planning commission?
The 45-day,
think you could
Pardon?
do
the
that.
45-day one? Is that
Yeah,
what you're talking about?
anyone who supports that?
Does that mean that the temporary signs that are exempt can be up indefinitely? Is that something that we want?
Some of it
I-
aligns with court, does it not?
Right.
Court case?
It's that Supreme Court case out of Arizona, right?
Can't regulate content. So if you're gonna say, we want them down after 90 days, it gets back to whatever day you don't have an administrative arm to go after that and to keep track of it.
So an election sign can go up and stay up
Yeah,
2 years until the next election.
that was specifically the Tempe versus Reed was about that. I want the right to say who I want to vote for at any time.
Freedom of speech comes into play.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so I would assume we'll let that recommendation pass this time. Just to recap, section 115103, the answer was no on that recommendation from the planning commission. On section 115105, the answer was no. On 115106, building wall signs, we agreed yes to those changes. 115107, freestanding signs, the answer was no. And finally, then on temporary signs, we decided to pass on the recommendation regarding duration.
How does council feel about the 200 linear feet issue, temporary sign? That pretty much is maybe a corner lot or a commercial lot. Everything else is limited into one sign.
What would you need,
I mean, the front of my yard's 98 feet.
what would you need two signs for?
Well, to Dave's point, let's assume you were on a corner. Right? And you, Patrick, I'm gonna look for you for guidance here, but what if you needed 2 for sale signs?
What if you needed what?
2 for sale signs, one on each street.
Realtor signs are exempt,
Where's
Mhm.
this exempt sign list?
under 115103 scope of requirements.
Yeah.
1151.0 scope of requirements.
Thank you.
I certainly am glad gravestones are exempt.
What would be another example of why we would need more than one sign per 200?
So I belong to a certain church. I let the church put a sign in my yard that there's a fish fry. And then somebody else comes along and wants to put a sign in for something else. Maybe I'm having a garage sale. Maybe there's a lost kitten. Maybe there's another event. The JC Festival is around the same time as St. Romulus Church Festival. They want both signs in their yard. Limiting it to one would force them to choose. So I just, again, I wasn't strongly advocating.
Everything that you just mentioned, besides the missing cat, is a nonprofit, charitable, exempted sign, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
but
really-
really the idea.
Right, but I'm,
Right.
but like,
Right.
true, what would there be that's not? I don't know.
Stuff to think about. Example where there's not an exemption. Well,
Yeah.
Okay, so we've answered everything except this question about 200 feet. Let's do this. My cheat sheet, set the date for the public hearing. I'm going to ask for a motion in a moment just to move this to the council agenda. And then to postpone further consideration. We can amend this on the fly. We'll give them 3 readings. We've got plenty of time to think this thing through. If you want to adjust it at 200 feet, then if you would make a note to remind the elder chairman of the committee, this is something that we might want to reconsider when we, after our public hearing, and we begin to move our first vote. How does that sound?
I think it sounds good, because maybe members of the public would say
Yeah.
Yeah.
that 200
Let's
feet
see-
is too
let's
restricted.
see where we are. All right, anything else on this, on the sign matter? Dave?
I'm
You
good. I'm good.
Christina, we're glad to have you
Good.
back. We good?
Glad to be here.
Okay, perfect. All right, I'm going to move, and I'll look for a second, that we move ordinance 6822 to the council agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, And I'm also gonna make a motion, and I'll look for a second that we postpone further consideration of this ordinance until after the public hearing on December
12.
12th, I'm sorry.
Destroy it seconds.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Opposed?
Any opposed? Public Bureau. Item 3B, ordinance 69-22, ordinance amending 1136 Main Street Districts Regulations and Codified Ordinances to repeal 1136-17 signage in its entirety. I think we've kind of been through this. Just to beat that horse. I'm going to make a motion.
Question,
Yes.
do we want to repeal it before we put the other one in place, or do it, repeal it at the same time and then put the other one in place?
Well,
So we don't want to put this on the agenda.
No, it's not.
we're gonna postpone further consideration.
This
Right.
also
Yeah.
requires a public hearing.
We're gonna have
Both
public
of them
hearing.
do.
Thank
So
you.
to answer your question is, they should go in tandem.
Mhm.
Okay.
Clerk will have us synchronized. That's the term, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Young? Very good. Okay, I'm gonna make a motion, and I'll look for a second. We set the public hearing for this on December 12th.
Second.
Seconds.
And that is the appeal again, that's 69-20-22. Seconded, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I move that we place ordinance 69-22 on the council agenda. Is there a second?
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And I'll make a motion that we postpone further consideration of ordinance 69-22 until after the public hearing of December.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Very good. One more item. We need to make a technical correction to our contractor regulations. This is chapter 1310. If you will note in your packet, this is a technical correction. The language is presented. This is on page 24 of your packet. You'll notice that the proposed language, work without permission registration. That language is there, and the numbering is correct. Does that suffice the administration? Are there any questions or comments about that? Again,
So is there a way that we can update the website to include a link that takes you directly to those registered contractors? Because right now, it only goes to contractors to register, and then the list is clear at the bottom of that.
Idea.
Mhm.
I have a second one, idea.
There used to be a PDF list.
So if you go to registration, then go all the way to the bottom, you see the list. Can we, on that left-hand column, get a quick link to that list of registered contractors? I mean, it's a safety thing for residents to know that they're hiring a contractor that's registered in the city, before the contractors penalize double the rates to register, and then they just walk and take half the residents' money and never come back.
Are you just saying, putting that section in a more visible location?
Or a link in the column to the left, so they can. find
Yeah, I
it.
think what
Okay.
he's saying is in the black.
The black column.
Oh, I see what you're
Let's put it up there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right there.
You got contractor registration and renewal, we need to have a registered contractor list.
Yeah.
And it just takes them right to that.
Yeah,
Good idea.
although are these
I'll
all
have to hunt for it.
individual lists? Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Okay,
So
perfect.
I'll have to figure out how to do it, but
Alright.
yes, it can be done.
Then
Now
I'll
we've
work
been
with you
duly
then at a later
sidetracked.
date and try to get those PDF lists so that they're sortable.
Oh, that's a whole different request, but okay.
Yeah.
We good?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Great suggestion. I need a motion. I'll make the motion. If there are no further questions about this technical correction. That is cleaning up the language, not Dave's relocation of the list. But I'll make a motion that we place an amendment to chapter 1310 on the next council agenda. Is there a second?
That's right, second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very good. Before we conclude the Community Economic Development Committee, I think it's important to acknowledge the work that the Planning Commission did on the preceding items. We appreciate it. It was a great discussion.
Mhm.
I think it's good from time to time to review where we are, where we want to go in terms of aesthetics and signage. It's linked to economic development and the other things that make our community livable. And it's always good to have a second set of eyes on these proposals. So
Agreed.
kudos to, or our thanks to the Planning Commission. And with that, I'm going to surrender to the president.
All right, let's move on to finance and property.
Okay, this is just how our finance director cleans up the accounts at the end of the year, and it really is self-explanatory as it states. So she just needs us to move it forward. It doesn't need to be on any emergency. We'll just be reading it 3 times.
Again, that will be what?
Reading it 3 times. If no questions, we'll move to the agenda for the next time.
Revolt will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, motion carries.
All right. We'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Revolt moves.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okey-dokey.
Good thing.